Good morning and welcome to the 19th meeting of the Citizen Participation and Public Petitions Committee in 2025. And our first item of business is simply to agree that we'll take item 4 in private, where we'll be considering the evidence that we've heard this morning. Are colleagues content? We've received apologies from Fergus Ewing this morning. And because Fergus is an independent member now, there is no substitute for Mr Ewing. And Maurice Golden has been called to speak to amendments to a bill he is progressing, which has been considered by our colleagues in the Rural Affairs Committee. He was here, then was summoned off, but we hope he will be joining us again at some point during this morning's proceedings. So we move to item 2, which is consideration of continued petitions. And the first of these is the very important petition that we've been considering for some time following our visit as well to Wishaw Hospital and our evidence session at the last committee meeting. It's petition number 2099 to stop the proposed centralisation of specialist neonatal units in NHS Scotland. And it was lodged by Lynn McRitchie. The petition calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to stop the planned downgrading, and it's important to say that's what it is, downgrading of established and high-performing specialist neonatal intensive care services across NH Scotland from a level 3 to a level 2, and to commission an independent review of this decision in light of contradictory expert opinions on centralising services. And we last considered this petition at our last meeting, when we heard evidence from the British Association of Perinatal Medicine and then from the Best Start Perinatal subgroup. And so this morning I'm delighted that we're taking evidence from Jenny Minto, who's the Minister for Public Health and Women's Health, and her supporting officials Kirsty Campbell, Unit Head of the Maternity, Neonatal and IVF Policy, and also from Danielle Wadevin, is it, Wadevin? Neonatal Policy Manager. And Minister, if you invite your colleagues to join in when you think it appropriate, or they can signal to me if they'd like to offer an additional contribution. We've also been joined by our colleague Claire Adamson this morning. Good morning to you, Claire, and I would hope to invite Claire to join the questioning after the committee members have said anything, or if she wants to let me know, it may well be that we can bring you in on a key point. I know, Minister, you've got some opening remarks you would like to make just before we move to the questions, so over to you.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you for inviting me to provide evidence today. Addressing concerns about the new model of neonatal care is very important to me, so I'm pleased to be able to be here to talk to this petition. Firstly, I want to address a point made at previous committee session and make it absolutely clear that no units are closing as part of the new model of neonatal care. In 2023-24, around 4,500 babies were cared for in neonatal units. Just over 800 were admitted to intensive care. The vast majority of those babies would only need intensive care for a short period, less than 48 hours. A small number will need longer, highly specialised intensive care. For these babies, the complexity of that neonatal intensive care has increased, particularly for those babies born at extremes of prematurity or with extremely low birth weights. As the committee heard from Stephen Wardle of BAPM and Andrew Murray and Jim Crombie, the chairs of the perinatal subgroup, the clinical evidence shows that outcomes for the smallest and sickest babies is improved when they are born and cared for in a unit with a high throughput of cases, defined as at least 100 new very low birth weight admissions per year, and where support services are co-located. This evidence underpinned the Best Start recommendation and also the professional guidance published by the British Association for Perinatal Medicine. As defined in the guidance and as highlighted by Stephen Wardle to the committee, local neonatal units will continue to provide a level of intensive care and be able to care for singleton births over 27 weeks gestation, with babies receiving care in one of the 3 intensive care units being transferred back to their local neonatal unit for ongoing care as soon as possible. The Best Start report was based on evidence and a range of expert clinical opinion. The options appraisal that followed, as you heard from Jim Crombie and Andrew Murray, was objective, followed evidence-based criteria and was undertaken by an expert group comprising clinicians with service users represented by Bliss. I was disappointed to hear at the last committee hearing that colleagues raised again that NHS Lanarkshire was not present within the process. I have corrected this point many times previously, and I am grateful to Jim Crombie for further clarifying to the committee NHS Lanarkshire's involvement in both the perinatal subgroup and the Best Start programme board. The members were appointed based on national roles. They represented to provide an objective view to an evidence-based clinical approach. As the committee previously heard, the requirement to have the right infrastructure in place is essential to support implementation of the new model and optimising the parental experience. When I announced these changes in 2023, I asked the regional chief executives to lead on detailed implementation plans that described how they will build capacity in the 3 units before commencing any changes. The Scottish Government also commissioned detailed capacity modelling to inform these plans. In addition, work is underway with the Regional Chief Executive's Task and Finish Group to look at maternity capacity, financial modelling and COT capacity management. The Best Start report had family-centred care as one of its core principles. One of the earliest Best Start recommendations was the establishment of the Neonatal Expenses Fund in 2018, now the Young Patients Family Fund, and all neonatal units to provide accommodation on or near the neonatal unit for parents of the sickest babies. Other improvements include accessible psychological support services for parents offered throughout their neonatal journey. Since my appointment, I have been committed to listening to both families and clinicians from across Scotland, and I have seen at first hand the passion and commitment of the neonatal staff by visiting the University Hospital in Wishaw, the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital in Glasgow and the new Royal Infirmary in Edinburgh. I've also met with Wishaw neonatal campaigners and elected representatives on several occasions. I had the pleasure of presenting both Ninewells and Forth Valley neonatal units with their Bliss Baby Charter Gold Awards, recognising the care these units provide and will continue to provide. I also want to thank staff at Ninewells for their efforts in reassuring the local people that the new model is the right model. I want to put on record my thanks to all the neonatal nurses and consultants who do such a fantastic job in caring for babies and supporting families, and to thank Bliss for all the work they do for families at a time when they need that support the most, and their work to advocate for these families in national policy. I recognise the families will be concerned about the change, but I want to provide reassurance that this decision has been made in the very best interests of these very smallest and very sickest babies. And I would like to thank the committee for listening carefully to the evidence of those involved in this process and for taking time to visit Wishaw University Hospital. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Well, let's start where we are actually all agreed. I think that any concerns that there were financial motivations in all of this have been dispelled to the committee's satisfaction. I think we are convinced from the evidence we've heard that the best interests of babies have been at the forefront of the decision-making process in all of this. So we're agreed on that point. I also agree that there has been a certain amount of confusion and misinformation, and I was careful to say at the start again that some units are being downgraded, they're not being closed, and we'll come to the detail of all of that too. But I guess where we are still wrestling is that there was the prospect of a reduction in the number of units at the full level of services down to somewhere between 3 and 5, and we landed at 3. And there have been concerns expressed about the geographical inconsistency of Glasgow, Edinburgh and Aberdeen and the south of Scotland and all the way up to Wishaw, therefore the Central Belt being under-provided. And although I've not yet seen it, well, before I say that, the other thing that I think was very evident, and this impressed the committee, was we heard from the specialist services last week, those who'd been involved in the decision, and there was a caveat to their support for their own recommendations. And that caveat is that the capacity and the resourcing and everything that is required to ensure that this model can work has to be in place. And I think the committee, obviously, given that we are politicians of long standing, have all, from personal experience, not just in the field of health, but in the field elsewhere, been aware of similar initiatives in relation to services of all manner of kind, where in the event that didn't prove to be the case. But of course, in relation to the lives of very fragile newborn babies, not having that in place right from the start would be a concern. So there's the geographical issue, and there is the will the resource be in place. And we understand, although I've not seen, and Davy Russell will speak to it in a little bit more detail, that the clinicians at Glasgow have written asking for this to be paused because they do not believe that Glasgow does have the capacity and that they are currently overstretched and therefore unable to take up the commitment that is being suggested they would embrace. Now that rings alarm bells for us as a committee because it plays directly to the concern that we have that the capacity will not be in place when this goes live. So you yourself, I think, Minister, said, sorry, it's a long preamble, you yourself said a moment ago that these changes would evolve when such capacity is in place. So I suppose my first initial questions are about the geography, about the capacity, about the resilience of the preparation for that capacity, and when you think it would be safe, given the concerns that we're hearing expressed, because obviously if Glasgow is at full capacity, then we would have this geographical issue that has been represented to us time and again of parents finding the baby separated by being as far away as Aberdeen. Whether you think all of these things, when you think these things would be safe to deploy.
Okay, thank you, convener. May I start just by quoting from the Best Start Report 2017, and it said it is proposed that 3 to 5 neonatal intensive care units should be the immediate model for Scotland, progressing to 3 units within 5 years. That's the full quote. I am absolutely clear that we need to do this in the safest way possible, given that the intended outcomes ensure the safety and the best outcomes for the smallest and sickest babies. The intention from 2017 was always to phase this, and that started in 2019 with 2 units, Crosshouse Hospital and Victoria Hospitals, one in Ayrshire and Arran and one in Fife, linking up with what will be so Ayrshire and Arran linked up with QEUH, Victoria and Fife linked with Lothian. So we did that as the first step and took learnings from that. I don't need to remind anyone in this committee that we then hit COVID, so there was then the pause in the services. And after COVID, as you've received evidence in this as well, there was a review to ensure that the circumstances were still the same. And that was, again, still supported the Best Start work. So in July 23, I announced that 3 NICU, neonatal intensive care units, would be announced. And you got evidence last week, I think it was from Andrew Murray, stating that, and actually also Stephen Wardle talked about the model in England and the fact for the population size of Scotland and the number of babies, then 2 would be the appropriate number. But because of the geography for Scotland, and I think Andrew Murray noted this and Jim Crombie, it was felt that there needed to be one in the north, and that was selected to be Aberdeen. So that partly, I think, goes some way to responding to your question with regards to geography. I live on Islay, that's an island, as everyone knows. If there was this circumstances arose on Isla, then that family would have to be helicoptered off the island. So we have Scotstar that is both a helicopter service and also an ambulance service. And they are currently moving babies around between Wishaw, for example, and QEUH just now. So that service has been set up for, I think it's about 20 years. It is seen as a world-class service. We have got hugely experienced neonatal staff working on that, giving the best support and treatment and care to families that require it. So we've looked at the geography, we've looked at the Central Belt, and then we've also looked further north in Scotland as well. Plus, Scotstar and the Scottish Ambulance Service have been very involved in all the work as it's progressed. So therefore, we have that support through. Now, capacity, you're absolutely right. And this is one of the questions that we, as myself as the Minister, but also my officials, have been working hard on. And we commissioned a piece of work to look at the capacity within each of the units, and also the best model to support the move to 3 units. And from my perspective, that's really important. And that work spoke to each of the units and also took wider information as well. And then that was shared with the regional chief executives who have set up a task and finish group to move this forward. Now, this work was never going to, the announcement was never going to happen on day 1 and the change happen on day 2. That was never the intention. There has always been this intention of incremental steps as we move towards the more concentrated neonatal intensive care units, which will have that throughput of around 100 babies each year with the co-located additional services. And I think that's really important to recognise. Now, with regards to the comments from the clinicians, if I may, I'd like to hand over to Kirsty with regards to that.
Yeah, and thank you, Convener. Happy to speak on this issue. The Minister has highlighted the process we have in place around implementation planning. So we have 3 regional chief execs who have established plans in their regions for how they're going to implement this. And as the Minister highlighted, the expectation is not that we will be implementing this on day 1 after the announcement was made. We always knew there would be this period of implementation. We commissioned the work from RSM UK that modelled the capacity required in each of the units. And then we shared that with the regional chief executives and set the expectation that their regional plans would identify how they will move from where they are now to that position where they have the capacity to be able to look at this, to implement this. The Task and Finish group identified a number of pieces of work that needed to happen before we were able to move, and that included doing some work on maternity modelling, so looking at the maternity capacity in the units, recognising that the majority of these women, the expectation would be that they transfer in utero, so they give birth to their babies who need neonatal intensive care in the units that they are moved to. And so we've done some work on modelling the maternity capacity required. We've done some work on looking at the financial model that needs to be put in place so that funding follows these babies. We've also, the government has pump primed the implementation in practice, and to date we've provided over £7.5 million worth of funding to both Glasgow and Edinburgh and a small amount to Aberdeen in order to support building that capacity that is required in order to start the move. It will always be incremental, as the Minister outlined. We will start potentially with the small, very, very smallest babies, the ones who are at the most risk, and we will start to move those when those babies are moved and that system is in place and is seen to be working. We will move forward with incremental change. The expectation is that we will be able to build that capacity up as we move forward with that incremental change.
Well, 2 questions that follow from that. Can you illustrate for us, relative to the size of the unit that there is in Glasgow just now, the size of the unit that you would expect there would be, and what you envisage the timetable of this transition being?
I can. That was outlined by the report that we did, that we commissioned from RSM UK. They set the expectation that there will be additional 10 cots in QUH in Glasgow. There will be an additional 4 cots required in Edinburgh Royal Infirmary, and there will be an additional 1.5 cots required in Aberdeen Maternity Unit.
And just for the completeness of the record, can you say what the existing capacity is that those additional units are on top of?
The capacity flexes, I'll have to research in my folder for the numbers precisely, but the capacity flexes across the units because you have a number of intensive care beds, but they can also be used as high dependency beds. They will flex between the two in a number of different cases. I can get the numbers for you.
It would be helpful, I think.
Yeah.
But it is just this, because this is the guts, I think, of any reassurance in relation to the capacity of the model to cope. And in relation to the timeline you imagine this actually evolving over, what is the thought in relation to that?
So the timeline has moved since we started the implementation, because we asked the regional chief execs to have a look at the timeline and the development that they were going to have to do and how long that capacity building would take. And we had a bit of experience from running the early implementer boards in Fife and in Ayrshire, as the Minister outlined. In those two boards, it took us about a year from start to finish to get the work from initial discussions through to actually starting to move the babies. It took us a full year. And those units were a significantly smaller level than the units we're now talking about. So it is a much bigger task. We are behind schedule, I think it's fair to say. There has been a lot more work required, and I mentioned some of the work around maternity modelling, financial modelling, which has taken a bit longer than we expected. But the expectation is that once the work begins, that we should be able to conclude that within a year to 18 months.
Right. And so if I'm looking at this in political chunks, sometime in the first half of the next Parliament, which begins in May 2026, you would expect sometime in the first half of that Parliament for this transition to have been completed?
I would expect that, yes.
Yeah, okay. Right, that's helpful, and members may come back as we progress. One thing I would just like to, before I bring in David, because I think David Russell, because I think it would be helpful just to understand. Minister, could you set out what types of cases will be handled by each level of the National Service?
So there are 3 levels under the BAPM structure. So you have the National Intensive Care Units, and that is the one that we're talking about for the 3 areas, Glasgow, Edinburgh and Aberdeen. And they will be caring for the smallest and sickest babies, which are those born under 27 weeks and with a body weight, I think, of less than 800 grams. So it's these babies that we are talking about, and they are and they need that additional care, sitting beside co-located surgery and other neonatal support. Then you have the local neonatal units, and I think actually one thing I should also say is that decisions to move babies are very much taken from a clinical perspective. So it would be the decision by the clinicians as to whether a baby should move. Now, the local neonatal units will their babies up to 1,500 grams, and these local neonatal units provide all levels of care. So singletons greater than 27 weeks and multiple births greater than 28 weeks. Babies requiring perhaps a short period of intubated ventilator support as well. So a level of intensive care that was highlighted last week very much by both Andrew Murray and Jim Crombie. Now, the special care units, they provide care for babies of 32 weeks gestation and upwards, and some may care for babies greater than 30 weeks of gestation. Again, that's dependent on local geography, and that, as we know from Mr Ewing's questions last week, is a key thing within Scotland. And they will also provide care for those babies with additional care needs who do not meet either the intensive care or high dependency care criteria. So these are well-known categories, if I may call them that, within the neonatal practice, and Scotland is following the BAPAM guidelines in moving in this direction.
Okay, thank you. David Russell?
You mentioned Scotstar transfers. Obviously, their role in this will significantly increase when we're moving down to 3 units. Do they have the capacity and have in your financial modelling built in any costs for them increasing their capacity to manage this increase in demand?
Okay, I thank David Russell for his question. So Scotstar, you're absolutely right, is absolutely key in ensuring that there is the right support. And as I highlighted earlier, Scotstar has been operating for 20 years. It's a well-recognised model of providing transfer for the smallest and sickest babies between hospitals. And as I said earlier, Scotstar and the Scottish Ambulance Service, who operate Scotstar, have been involved in the Best Start work right from the start, and that's really important. So any modelling that is required will be done. As Kirsty Campbell noted, the work is happening on a financial basis. One of the directors of finance that's part of the Task and Finish group is looking at this from a Once for Scotland approach. So if there is a need for the capacity of Scotstar to increase, then that will most certainly be built into this to ensure that babies are transported and they're are in the safest, carefulest way to ensure they are the best outcomes for them. Based on your answer, you're telling me that it's not been done yet. You know, and sorry if I've given you that impression. Yeah, that's not the intention. Because all the capacity work is being done just now. It's important that that is done. We've been very clear that that needs to be done carefully. And I was aware that some of the evidence you got last week was that the modelling hadn't been done. That's exactly the work that we have asked the Task and Finish group to do to ensure we do have the right services to provide the right care for the babies. And you mentioned that the original review, that the report was done in 2017, and then after the kind of COVID period, you reviewed it again to make sure it was the right way forward. Was it the same people that reviewed it, or was it independently done? So it was reviewed by the initial group, but then after I made the decision, who were the experts who was basing their decisions on expert evidence, which you heard last week. But once I had made the decision and I was being questioned by, and rightly so, by families and other clinicians, that I asked the DCMO to review it again to ensure that we had followed the right evidence and the right results were coming from that report. And also, as part of the review, Bliss have come out and says, because I read it last night, that they didn't consult with the parents because it wasn't in their terms of reference. Yes, I've read that as well, Mr Russell, and Bliss are there as an advocacy group to represent generally people that have experienced this type of care. What I also asked to be done, which was done in June last year, to help progress the move to 3 in neonatal intensive care units, was that through Citizen Space we did a survey of patients and parents that had experienced neonatal intensive care to ensure that their voices were heard. And we also did a number of focus groups. And as I indicated in my introductory remarks, I have also met with parents, and I've also met with patients and parents in neonatal units in Scotland just to hear about the care that they are getting. So I'm confident that that voice is listened to. I've also been very clear in the task and finish group that there is a recognition of the importance of listening to the patient's voice as well, to ensure that that is heard clearly.
And yet the parents groups that I've heard, and we had a chat with them, that basically they say you're listening, but you're still just carrying on regardless.
So I think I would be remiss if I wasn't following the expert clinical advice that you heard last week, which is clear that the smallest and sickest babies get the best outcomes if they are treated in neonatal intensive care units that have a greater throughput. And I find that a really awkward phrase to use when you're talking about babies, but a greater number of babies going through the system to ensure that the clinicians and the nurses and everybody else in these units that are looking after these babies are of the right standard to get the best outcomes for the babies. Now, I've visited Wishaw, I've also visited Nine Wells and other neonatal units in Scotland, and the staff there, as I indicated in my notes, opening remarks, are fantastic. And I respect and have great confidence in the work that they are doing. But it would be remiss of me as the Minister for Public Health and Women's Health not to listen very clearly and read very closely the evidence from other experts, clinicians, and also BAPM as well.
Obviously, there'll be more transportation, more logistics involved here, transporting mothers and babies. When a transfers to take place, will it be the general ambulance service, or will they need to make their own way to the units?
So I've been very clear that with the babies, it's ScotStar that will do that. The decision on whether a mother can travel with the baby is dependent on the health of that mother. My understanding of the layout of a ScotStar ambulance is that the mother would have to sit for the duration of the journey, and that might not be appropriate for her own health. So therefore, separate transportation, if I can use that word, decisions would have to be made as to what was the safest and the right way for that mother to be transferred. It may be by ambulance, but it may also be by private car.
Yeah, obviously, you hear every week, I know that based on the casework I have, that the ambulance service is stretched, that's me putting it mildly, that obviously this is going to put more pressure on the ambulance service. Do you have any plans to increase capacity in ambulance service?
So ScotStar is a separate ambulance, it's not the general ambulance, so there are key ambulances that are designed specifically for neonatal baby transfer.
Sorry, but I think Mr Russell's point is, just as we were talking about a moment ago, one, I mean, I'd be interested to know if there is an expectation that the ScotStar service will need to be augmented in some way, irrespective of, the initial planning that's going on. But is there that expectation there? But I think Mr Russell's point is, that if the general ambulance service is called upon to ferry the mother, potentially if that was from, I don't know, south of Wishaw to Aberdeen, that ambulance is going to be right out of the system for quite a time in an environment where we already know that there can be very long waiting times for ambulances. And I suppose there's just this concern. And you did say it could be by private car, so I accept there could be other options. But it's not I think at the moment it's not necessarily the most reassuring environment that a mother or somebody contemplating being in this position might feel particularly reassured by.
Convener, you're absolutely right. I cannot imagine what it would be like for any family to be in this situation, which is why I'm trying to be very candid with you to say that the baby would be transferred by Scotstar, the mother would be as well if she was able to be. If not, then we have to recognise the pressures that are on the ambulance service just now. So therefore, the transport would be organised to mitigate any issues on availability of ambulances to support mothers' transfer.
Sorry, Mr. Russell, I interrupted.
Might I add something, possibly?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Just to say that where women do require to be transferred by ambulance, it will largely be from an obstetric unit to another obstetric unit, and we have really clear protocols in place that have been developed by our Scottish Perinatal Network, and those have all published over the course of the last few years, outlining exactly how you transfer women by ambulance from an obstetric unit to an obstetric unit and the priority that these calls have to take within the system. So that guidance has been developed, recognising that we're going to need that for this new model. So that guidance has been developed and published.
Yeah, but my original point was if that is the case, it's a #1 priority, then there must be strain on the system somewhere else. If this is going to be used a lot more,
the numbers will be low.
Then in effect there'll be some people waiting for
Yeah.
other things a lot longer.
The numbers will be low. We reckon that there will be between sort of 50 and 60 women a year who will need to be transferred under this new model. The expectation is the vast majority of women, the very vast majority of women, will be transferred from the local neonatal unit that or the hospital that they're in to the nearest intensive care unit. So the long transfers should be rare, if not negligible, in terms of distance travelled. There will be very rare occasions, for example, when you have a high number of multiple births or something like that, where babies may need to travel a little bit further, but that has happened so rarely over the last 10 years that it really wouldn't even factor into planning.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing I'd mentioned about the chair had mentioned about the letter from the consultants in Glasgow, the neonatal consultants. Do you have that letter?
I've seen that letter, yes. That letter came in, I think, about 18 months ago. We, at the time, discussed it with the regional chief executive who was leading the implementation. And the regional chief executive at that time was the same chief executive who was the chief executive of Greater Glasgow and Clyde, Jane Grant. And she assured us that the issues raised in that letter were being accounted for within their regional plan that they were putting together.
Mm-hmm. Why did that not get brought to the attention of this committee till now? It wasn't you that told me, it was somebody else. You know, that I think that's relevant because they're expert people as well.
So they had concerns about the process of building capacity within the QEUH and how that would be managed. And they had concerns about capacity within their own unit at that time as well. So these were conditions from the Princess Royal Maternity Unit, which will be changed to a local neonatal unit under the new model. And some of those concerns were local concerns that were addressed by the board, by NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde. And some of those concerns were things that were taken into the planning process in terms of regional planning. So it was some time ago, and the issues, as we understand it, have been considered within the regional plans.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Minister and officials. Minister, what work has been carried out on how to identify a transfer of women before they give birth, the ones that are could be in this situation?
Thank you, David Torrance, for that question, because that is something I think you heard some evidence from Stephen Wardle last week with regards to that. And certainly in the work that we did with Crosshouse near Sharnaran, going to Glasgow, and also the Royal Victoria to Lothian, it was very clear that we have the best outcomes are if you can travel, if the mother and baby can travel in utero. Sorry, losing my words, in utero. And that should be picked up in the visits that mothers-to-be have with their maternity staff in their journey, and they will be put on. There's different pathways that expectant mothers are put on, and that's something that would be taken account of. There'll be certain areas that will require the maternity staff to ensure that they recognise if a mother is likely to give birth early.
If I might add as well, again, the Scottish Perinatal Network have put together a piece of guidance, again, in anticipation of requiring really strong, clear guidance on identification of expected preterm labour, and that has also been published and shared widely around the Scottish clinical community. So there are a number of elements that have been put in place ahead of us making this move to help support the clinicians across the country, make sure that this is done safely and done well.
Minister, around family-centred care, how would you respond to it? Families just now don't receive enough financial support or care support, and especially with the distances now involved. What is the Scottish Government going to put in place to help families financially when they're going to have to travel these huge distances?
So if I can refer back to Bliss and Bliss's involvement in the Best Start right at the start, this was one of the points that they made very clearly, was that if you do have a baby that's in intensive care for a period of time, then that can be financially draining on the family. So as a result of that, one of the requirements of Best Start was to set up the Neonatal Family Fund, which then provided money for families that were in this situation, whether it be for food, accommodation or travel. So that was covered. We've since extended that to the Young Patients Family Fund, which ensures that that is available for families in these circumstances. I had I visited those that organise the YPFF in QEUH, and for people that are dealing with expenses and finance, they were a few of the most caring people that I had met, because they recognise the impact and the pressures and the stresses that this can put on families. So they ensured that all the staff in the neonatal wards were aware of the YPFF, but also have visits themselves and will support families in completing the application forms for the funds. Now, that can be on a weekly basis or it can be at the end of a stay. It's entirely up to the family how the regularity of these funds arrive. But I think that's a really important thing, and I would commend Bliss for the work that they did to ensure that that was included in one of our recommendations. And another area, not only on the finance side, that Bliss were very positive about was around the psychological support for families in this situation as well. So again, that can be either provided on the wards, but also third sector, including Bliss, will also provide that support.
Just coming to the first sector, Minister, how would you respond to claims that the new model heavily relies on the third sector to provide that care? So
generally, I think our health service can only benefit from support from the third sector. Because there are certain areas, and if you look at the operational improvement plan, the population health plan and the strategic review framework, they all point to it being a much more holistic need for health care, which includes not only the primary care that we get in our GP surgeries and opticians and pharmacists, etc., and then in our more acute areas, which is the hospitals. There is also a wraparound, if I can describe it like that, from the third sector, providing a different type of support that they're very good at.
If I might just add to what the Minister has said, one of the people will be aware that this recommendation came from the Best Start, the report that we published in 2017, and one of the fundamental premises of the Best Start was around improving. Neonatal intensive care was part of it, but there was a whole package of improvement recommendations around neonatal care that we've been putting in place ever since. And one of the that includes improvements to neonatal units across Scotland, including the development of transitional care, which sees mothers and babies kept together in a maternity ward rather than babies being taken off to a special care baby unit, as would have previously been the case. The addition of 7-day neonatal community care, so allowing parents to get their babies home earlier with support in the community, so that they can receive the care that they need at home, and a whole range of other things, including the Young Patients Family Fund, which was previously the Neonatal Expenses Fund that the Minister has highlighted. But one of the other things just to highlight is we've been moving forward in Scotland with the implementation of the Bliss Baby Charter. So Bliss have developed this set of standards for all neonatal units, and we've been supporting neonatal units in Scotland to implement that Bliss Baby Charter, the criteria within the Bliss Baby Charter, to provide that best care for families. And it's about a whole range of things that make things easier for families to be with their babies in neonatal care, including provision of food, and provision of accommodation, includes parents as partners in care, so recognising that parents are not visitors to neonatal units, they're partners in the care for their baby. So that sort of fundamental ethos and that change to that family-centred care approach has been a core part of implementation. And Bliss, one of our leading charities, as the Minister outlined, has been really instrumental in helping our units move forward with that whole package of measures.
No further questions.
Can I just pursue that a little further as well, in the context of a parents that I met when I was in Wishaw, who were speaking about the situation that might develop for other parents post the implementation of these changes. And we're talking here about families in extremis, because obviously we're talking about the sickest child. And this parent said, my wife was left in a life-threatening state after the birth of the baby. Had this situation been in place, I would have been left with the invidious choice of my wife and child not being at the same hospital, but potentially one being in Aberdeen and one being in the hospital. But also there are siblings in the family as well. And talking to those people about the family-centred care package, these other responsibilities don't seem to necessarily be accommodated within the thinking of those who are offering support. And I just wonder whether there needs to be yet more work done in relation to what is provided within this family-centred care, because clearly, yes, it might be that there's accommodation costs that are being covered, there might be travel costs being covered, but they may have other children, and there could be the need for emergency childcare to have to be provided in order to support that family in those circumstances. And at the moment, it seems that doesn't seem to be part of the package. So I think when they said they didn't feel supported enough, they felt that, yes, there is a provision there which meets some of the emergency criteria that they feel they're being faced with financially, but maybe doesn't offer the comprehensive level of support that they felt would be helpful. And I just wonder, in the conversations that have taken place with parent groups, whether we've teased out all of that, and whether, you know, the provision can be made as easy in these circumstances for families who are in extremis and, you know, in an unplanned way, obviously, rather than even a planned situation where people can anticipate that they might be going to be in a hospital further away than they might have expected.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point to make. And as I understand it, the majority of boards do allow siblings to stay on site as well with their parents. But I recognise what you're describing. And as I said earlier, I can't imagine what it would be like to be in that situation. And I just reflect back on the nursing staff and the clinicians that I have met, and also the people that work for the YPFF. And I recognise how caring they are, that they will want to support, where possible, families in these difficult, traumatic circumstances.
I make the point.
You make the point.
Yeah. Can I just return? You obviously referred to the phasing that had already taken place. What have been the outcomes of that, just in terms of the success rate, in terms of mortality, and well, essentially that?
So I can't comment on the mortality, but maybe...
So when we introduced the phasing, the expectation was that we were testing the implementation of the model. But we always knew, and we discussed this around the table in the perinatal subgroup, that we wouldn't really be able to, with that phasing process, be able to test the impact on outcomes, because there is a very small number of these babies, as you can imagine. These are very, very sick babies as well. They are the sickest babies that we have in Scotland. And so the expectation and what we've been building towards is that the evaluation process for this needs to take place over a much longer time period. So in order to have a realistic assessment of the impact of these changes on these babies in terms of mortality and in terms of morbidity and in terms of other outcomes for the children, their long-term developmental outcomes, we need a much longer process to be able to look at these. So we're looking at putting in place a full study that will analyse over a period of probably up to about 10 years how the changes impact on these children.
So in essence, we've got confidence in the model that we're pursuing, and it is underwritten by the clinicians and others who've been involved in the design and development and recommendations that are being implemented. But in fact, it will be some time later before we are absolutely able to determine that the decisions that were made were in fact the correct ones.
Absolutely. The evidence that the Best Start decision was based on is clear that the expectation is that these babies will have improved outcomes. But because the numbers are so small, it will take us a long time to properly be able to evidence that change.
If I may, I think last week you got evidence from Stephen Wardle that talked about the change in the model in England and the improvements that had made in outcomes. Yeah, no,
yes, I accept that was the case. And can we just address, and I think I'm kind of getting to the end of the elements. So obviously, just to allow you to reflect on this, and I think you touched on the group that made the decisions being all there for their professional experience and judgment rather than necessarily the hospitals that they represented. But in that final decision, obviously, despite the earlier involvement, there is a residual feeling in one or two of the other units that they potentially weren't represented. So have you discounted any sense in your own mind of bias?
Yes.
Fine.
That's all you need to say. Claire Adamson.
Thank you very much, Convener. I've just a couple of questions because, as the Convener said at the start, there has been a level of misinformation, and I see that the impact of that in speaking to constituents almost daily. We talked about the levels of the service going from a 3 to a 2. Is Glasgow a 3 at the moment?
Yes.
Yeah, so there's 3 units in Glasgow. There's the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital, the Princess Royal Maternity and the Royal Alexandra Hospital in Paisley. And the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital and the Princess Royal Maternity are both what we used to call level 3 units and will be neonatal intensive care units under the new language. And the Royal Alexandra Hospital in Paisley is a level 2 unit, is already a local neonatal unit.
And I guess this is the why I was getting to the question, as you said, that we talked about a downgrading, but is this not a realignment? Because I know, as a local representative in Wishaw, that babies have to travel to Glasgow at the moment for those co-located services like neonatal surgery. And the experts showed us last week that it wasn't just neonatal surgery that was valid. It was paediatric pharmacy and paediatric anaesthesia and all those expert areas that just don't exist at Wishaw at the moment. So, in terms of, do you think it's reasonable to still use level 3, level 2? Should be moving to a different terminology in the new model?
Yeah, we want to align neonatal care in Scotland with the terminology that's used across the whole of the UK, and that is around, as we've highlighted, neonatal intensive care units, and the expectation is there will be 3 of those. We've got 6 currently, there will be 3 of those in Scotland. Local neonatal units, and I recognise the terminology is not entirely descriptive of what they will do, because they will do a level of intensive care. Those units will care for babies, provide intensive care to those babies for up to 48 hours. And then we've got the special care baby units, which are the level 1 units, and they provide that care for babies at a higher gestational age.
Thank you. And I just have a final comment to the committee is we talked a lot about the impact of neonatal births on the families and things, and I think some of the employment law around that, where maternity leave legally kicks in at the birth of a baby, should be looked at. I know there is a fund for neonatal care, but I think these disadvantaged children from the very start face immense challenges, as do their families, and I think that there should be some provision before the date, after the date of birth, and between what would be a normal birth week. There should be more support for employers and funding coming from part of that area as well. I don't think it's just about the initial costs for families.
No, thank you for that. In fact, the areas of deprivation and their consideration was part of the discussion we had last week as well. Minister, is there anything you or your colleagues would like to add further? I think we've covered quite a lot of the ground, well, all of the ground that was of central concern to ourselves.
I would just like to reiterate my thanks in the work that the committee has done in this area, because clearly it is a very emotional area of healthcare, and one that we really want to get right. So the questions that you have prompted in your evidence gathering has ensured that we have that covered in the work that we've been doing with the Task and Finish group. So very appreciative.
And I suppose my final comment and reflection would be the petition is here because there remain people out there who are unconvinced, and they can only be so because, for whatever reason, they've not understood the issues, or they have raised concerns which may yet hopefully be accommodated or addressed. But communication is always very important in these matters, and maybe there's still work that needs to be done in relation to that, to offer the reassurance that people would want to know in advance of finding themselves in this situation.
Convener, I couldn't agree more with that final comment. I do think communication is incredibly important in this, and that is something that the Task and Finish group are being clear about, is communicating within their sphere of influence. But I absolutely take that on board and think it's a very fair point, well made.
And thank you to you and your officials, Minister, once again for engaging with us so constructively. We very much appreciate that, and I will now suspend briefly. Welcome back. And we now move to the consideration of additional open petitions. And I think it's terribly important, given that there are only a handful of meetings of the committee left, to say now that, irrespective of the merits of many petitions, the committee will have no option but to close them as this session of the Scottish Parliament comes to an end, with the final sitting of Parliament in March. And therefore, a number of very important petitions that we still believe as a committee that there is work that can yet be done may well be best served by the tabling of a fresh petition to the new Parliament when it meets in May next year. Or there may be a very small number of petitions that we will hold over as part of the legacy document that we pass on to the next Parliament. But it's no reflection in these last meetings of this committee before the dissolution of this Parliament on the merits of the petition that we will feel that there is little that we can do to advance the aims of the petition, given the very limited time still open to us. The first of the sequence of petitions we're hearing this morning follows on from our evidence with the Cabinet Secretary on the 24th of September, the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Care. And we explored a number of themes: patient experience, diagnostic and treatment pathways, capacity, skills and training, sustainability of funding and health service infrastructure, and the post-COVID-19 impacts and responses. And after the evidence session, as well as the evidence that was given, the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Care followed up in writing on a number of the outstanding issues. And so this morning we'll be considering the petitions which sit under the theme of diagnostic and treatment pathways. And then we will consider a petition on the theme of sustainability of funding and health service infrastructure. The committee has explored the specific issues raised in the petitions by seeking written evidence from stakeholders and ministers, and the thematic issues have also been explored in our recent oral evidence session with the Cabinet Secretary. So during the thematic evidence session, we raised that a number of the petitions have highlighted issues with diagnostic and treatment pathways, particularly in relation to conditions which may not be easily understood or easily diagnosed. And the Cabinet Secretary stated that a balance needs to be struck, as decisions about pathways might need to take place at a national level, whereas at other times it will be for local boards to determine how best to deliver services. So I'm going to provide an overview of the evidence received on each petition since it was last considered, and we will then move to consider what action should be taken on the petitions in a collective way. So the first of those petitions is petition number 1952. We've been joined by our colleague Edward Mountain, who's an interest in petitions within this group. And I will only be able to invite very, very brief comments, given the volume of business that we have before us this morning. 1952 is specialist services for patients with autonomic dysfunction, and it was lodged by Jane Clark, and it calls on the Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to instruct Scotland's NHS to form specialist services, training resources and a clinical pathway for the diagnosis and treatment of patients exhibiting symptoms of autonomic nervous system dysfunction, dysautonomia. We last considered this petition on the 11th of December last, when we agreed to write to the Minister for Public Health and Women's Health, who we've just heard from. And the Minister's response reiterates that autonomic disorders are part of the neurology speciality training curriculum, and it is within the remit of neurologists to diagnose and manage these symptoms as part of their routine practice in the majority of cases. Now, the submission also highlights the training resources on autonomic nervous system dysfunction that are available for practitioners on the NHS Learning Platform. The petitioner and Dr Leslie Cavey have provided a joint submission which reiterates that the POTS UK is not aware of any neurology specialists in Scotland who manage POTS and related conditions. The submission highlights a 2025 survey of people with suspected and diagnosed automatic dysfunction, which revealed that 90% of patients experience difficulty accessing NHS healthcare, and 59% reported that their GP had not heard of POTS or did not believe that it exists. Petition number 2031 to provide insulin pumps to all children with type 1 diabetes in Scotland was lodged by Maria Aitken on behalf of Caithness Health Action Team. And it calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to ensure that children and young people in Scotland who have type 1 diabetes and would benefit from a life-saving insulin pump are provided with one no matter where they live. And we last considered this petition on the 29th of May 2024, where we agreed to write to the Scottish Government and NHS Highland. In his correspondence following the evidence session, the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Care highlights significant progress made since the petition was lodged. In 24, the Government committed £8.8 million to expand access to closed-loop systems, CLS, partly to ensure that all children and young people living with type 1 diabetes in Scotland could access CLS. By early this year, approximately 75% of the under-18s affected had CLS access. And the Cabinet Secretary reiterates that NHS boards are expected to offer hybrid closed-loop systems to all eligible under-18s within a year of referral. And he also points to specific targeted funding for NHS Highland to support access to diabetes technology, including for insulin pumps. Now, this is a petition in which Mr Mountain has an interest. Is there anything you'd like to contribute, Mr Mountain?
Very briefly, Convener, if I may, can I first of all thank the committee for all the work they've done on this. It is without doubt the fact that the committee got involved in this that we are in the situation that we're in now. I appreciate the extra money that the government's put forward, and I appreciate the scrutiny from the committee has driven NHS Highland to make sure that all children, bar a small few, most of who don't want insulin pumps, have got the insulin pumps. So I think this is a victory for the committee, and I'd like to pay thanks to you and your team for doing that, and I would fully understand why you would now close the petition.
Thank you very much, Mr Mountain, and it is encouraging, in fact, to hear the progress that's been made during the period during which we've been considering the petition. Petition number 2038 is to commission suitable NHS services for people with hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and hypermobility spectrum disorders, and this was lodged by Ehlers-Danlos Support UK, and it calls on the Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to commission suitable NHS services for those with hypermobile EDS, HEDS, and hypermobility spectrum disorders, HSD, and to consult with patients on their design and delivery. And we last considered this petition on the 9th of October 24 when we agreed to write to the Scottish Government and to NHS Wales. The Scottish Government's response to the committee highlights NHS Education for Scotland's awareness-raising videos, which encourage healthcare professionals to, I quote, think rare when people present to them. Work has been underway to consider other resources to improve diagnosis, including a suite of digital tools that enable convenient and quick decision-making. The submission also points to assessment and referral guidance for hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which was developed by NHS Dumfries and Galloway last year. The response from NHS Wales outlines its work to create an international pathway which will offer a number of supports, including advice and diagnosis and treatment for primary care clinicians, direct access to therapy services for primary and community care rehab and supported self-management interventions, and clear referral guidance for those with suspicion of the rarer forms of EDS that require genetic testing and speciality involvement. The Scottish Government has confirmed that it would speak to the Welsh counterparts about the project plan on Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and consider whether it would be feasible for a similar exercise to be taken forward in Scotland. And the petitioner has provided a written submission which reiterates her view that EDS is not actually a rare condition, with studies suggesting a prevalence of about 1 in 227 and 1 in 500. The submission also sets out a number of questions for the Scottish Government. Petition number 2080, implement the recommended screening guidelines for people with Life-Romeni syndrome, was lodged by Louise McKendrick. It calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to implement screening in line with the guidelines recommended by the UK Cancer Genetics Group. And we last considered this petition on May 15, 2024, and at that time we again agreed to write to Cancer Research UK, the Scottish Government, and NHS Scotland genetic laboratories in Aberdeen, Dundee, Edinburgh and Glasgow. The Scottish Hereditary Cancer Genetics Group state that NHS Grampian, Tayside and Lothian and NHS Fife are all offering surveillance in patients with Life-Romeni syndrome in line with the guidelines published by the UK Cancer Genetics Group in 2020. The SHCGG do, however, consider that there is a gap regarding a Scotland-wide process for managing these patients, and in its own submission, Cancer Research UK encourages the Scottish Government to strengthen its links with the research community in this area, as well as engage in further dialogue from the UK National Screening Committee. The NSC has not made any recommendations about targeted surveillance or screening programmes for those with Li-Fraumeni syndrome. Petition number 2086 to recognise the vaccine injured and offer appropriate treatment was lodged by William Queen, and it calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to acknowledge those injured by COVID-19 vaccines and to have the NHS offer appropriate treatment to those who are injured. We last considered this petition on the 5th of March this year when we agreed to write to the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Care in NHS Scotland. The Scottish Government's response to the petition reiterates that in many cases it may be difficult for a clinician to explicitly determine if an illness or condition is linked to vaccination, and that it understands how this lack of acknowledgement may be deeply frustrating for citizens. The submission reiterates that if a patient has been vaccine injured and is experiencing a particular condition or symptom as a result, then the NHS should treat them for that condition as they would with any other patient who displayed those symptoms, regardless of the cause. And the petitioner's most recent submission highlights differences in the national response to long COVID and vaccine injury, as he states that resources have been given to address long COVID, whereas people with vaccine injury feel ignored. And as I set out in my opening remarks, we are now limited in the time remaining in this parliamentary session. And I feel that we've either made progress or as much progress as we can in this Parliament has been made with these petitions, one or two of which may want to see the results of promises that have been made realised and may well emerge as the subject of fresh petitions in the new Parliament. But I wonder, Mr Torrance, if you've any recommendation for the committee.
Thank you, Convener. I wonder if the committee would consider Petition 1952, Petition 2031, Petition 2038, Petition 2080 and Petition 2086. I wonder if we consider closing the petitions under Rule 15.7 of Standing Orders on the basis that the committee has progressed issues raised in individual petitions as far as possible in this parliamentary session, and the committee has raised relevant issues as part of a thematic evidence session with the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Care.
Thank you, Mr Torrance. Are we agreed? We are. We now move to the healthcare petition that sits under the theme of sustainability of funding and health service infrastructure, PE 2125, end the pause on new NHS building projects and prioritise capital funding for primary care buildings, lodged by Victoria Shotton, and calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to restart overdue work on NHS Scottish buildings and prioritise funding for primary care building projects to ensure community health teams have the physical spaces and renovations required to treat their patients efficiently and safely. And we last considered this petition on the 19th of February. We agreed to write to the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Care. The response for the Cabinet Secretary was that work to develop a whole system NHS infrastructure plan was being progressed in two key stages, one to do with short-term priorities, already in progress, and the other to do with longer-term investment priorities across the health estate. During the evidence session, the Cabinet Secretary stated that while the short-term plans were set out and voted on by Parliament, as part of the budget process, the long-term capital position is under review as part of the infrastructure investment plan, which the Government expects to bring forward as part of the budget and spending review process. Patrick Harvey initially indicated that he would wish to come to speak to this today, but I'm very grateful for his understanding in view of the responses that we've received. So I'm grateful to him for that. Do colleagues have any suggestions as to how we might proceed? Mr Torrance.
Thank you, Convener. I wondered if the committee would consider closing the petition under Rule 15.7 of Standing Orders on the basis that the committee has progressed issue raised in the individual petition as far as possible in this Parliament session, and the committee raised relevant issues as part of a thematic evidence session for Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Care.
Are we agreed with Mr Torrance's recommendation? We are. Thank you. So we do close that petition. And again, progress will become apparent in the Parliament that follows. Petition number 1876 to accurately record the sex of people charged or convicted of rape or attempted rape. was lodged by Lucy Hunter-Blackman, Lisa Mackenzie and Kath Murray. The petition calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to require Police Scotland, the Crown Office and the Scottish Court Service to accurately record the sex of people charged and convicted of rape or attempted rape. We've been joined this morning by our MSP colleagues Tess White and Carol Mochan. Good morning. I will remind colleagues that the Scottish Government's previously stated position is that the ask of the petition is an operational matter for the relevant bodies, and that the COPFS and SCTS have indicated that they are operating with data received from reporting agencies, including Police Scotland. Chief Constable Joe Farrell answered the committee's questions on this matter during an evidence session on the 12th of November. The Chief Constable unequivocally stated that Police Scotland supports the petition and that a man who commits rape or attempted rape should be and will be recorded by Police Scotland as a male. While the Chief Constable agreed that at times Police Scotland messages have been mixed, she clarified that Police Scotland has been recording the biological sex in relation to rape and sexual offences, and that this can be demonstrated in all 16,000 plus relevant offences recorded since 2018. We also heard that Police Scotland is actively undertaking a broader review into the terminology and recording practices it uses to collect and record sex and gender data in order to recommend improvements. The review is informed by developments in law and statutory guidance, human rights advice and ongoing engagement with stakeholders. The Chief Constable expects a substantial update on this work to be provided through the Scottish Police Authority next year. Additionally, in mid-October, Police Scotland decided to extend the recording of a person's biological sex and, where relevant, their transgender status to suspects and victims of all crimes and offences. The Chief Constable indicated that Police Scotland will implement that at pace across all relevant data systems, starting with 9 priority systems, which include custody, criminal justice cases, intelligence and crime recording. In an additional submission, the petitioners expressed their satisfaction with Police Scotland's position toward the petition. They also asked that the committee now writes to COPFS and the Scottish Courts and Tribunal Service to seek confirmation that they will follow Police Scotland's lead and not retrospectively alter any record of a person's sex, as well as seek similar reassurance from the Scottish Prison Service. Or actually, this goes beyond the scope of the petition. Before I invite suggestions from colleagues, can I ask Tess White if there's anything she'd like to contribute, and then Carol Walker. But briefly, please, given the pressures and time I'm afraid we now have.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you to the Petitions Committee for their work on this petition. And we do welcome the commitment from Joe Farrell and Police Scotland. And thank you also. It's good to hear that the key loose end is now going to be closed with the courts. And you will be right, the committee will be writing to the courts. So just 2 questions, if I may. One is, will that letter to the courts go before the end of the year, Convener? And also, for completeness, MBM has formally asked the committee to obtain the same reassurance from the Scottish Prison Service. Thank you.
Yeah, actually, we haven't taken a decision to send a letter yet. That's the recommendation of the petitioners that we might consider doing that. So rather jump the gun, but who knows, we might be minded so to do. Carol Mochan.
Thank you, and I thank the committee for allowing me to just say a few words. I fully support the petition, and I reiterate what you've said and Tess White have said around the decision of the police. That is very welcome. But I do believe that the relatively simple and straightforward issues that the committee could look at in terms of completing all of the work here. So I would urge the committee to write to the Crown Office, Scottish Court Services and the Scottish Prison Service to seek similar assurances that we've heard of today from Police Scotland, so that would see a full completeness of what it is that we're actually trying to do in terms of accurately collecting the data that is essential to maintain public trust, research monitoring and public policy in this area. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I am actually going to suggest that under Rule 15.7 of Standing Orders, we close the petition on the basis that Police Scotland has stated that it has been recording the biological sex of suspects in relation to rape and sexual offences, that it will continue to do so, and that it has decided to expand this approach to all crimes. The COPFS and STS operate with data received from reporting agencies, including Police Scotland, and the Scottish Government's position is that the issue raised in the petition is an operational matter for the relevant bodies. But in closing the petition, I'm quite happy to propose that the committee write to the CPOPFS, the Scottish Courts and Tribunals Service, and from the Scottish Prison Service to seek their assurance that they will be implementing the recommendations as outlined by the Chief Constable. So, just to be, we will follow that suggestion from the petitioners, but we will do it in the process of closing petition.
I was brief, Convener, and I'd just like to say thank you.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you. Our colleagues continue. We proceed on that basis. Thank you. Then we will. Petition number 1995, for which I offer an apology initially, in that I regret to say 2 petitions kind of rather slipped under the radar, and this important petition, which is to improve support for victims of spiking, lodged by Catherine Ann Mackay, was one of them. We heard one at a previous meeting, and it calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to develop a multi-agency approach to investigate spiking incidents, to ensure victims are given access to appropriate testing and incidents are investigated robustly. And so, rather unusually, the committee has actually not considered this petition since the 6th of December 2023. At that meeting, we agreed to write to the Scottish Government and Police Scotland. Police Scotland has confirmed that it monitors all occurrences of spiking and the progress of relevant investigations, including forensic ones. Data allows Police Scotland to identify if forensic samples have been obtained, refused or not obtained for other reasons. Current data also allows for comparative analysis of reported incidents, recorded crimes and the number of forensic samples submitted. The response also points to Police Scotland's investigative strategy, which provides guidance and direction to all staff that respond to or investigate spiking. Additionally, senior investigating officers are appointed within each territorial police division to act as divisional single points of contact for all spiking-relating matters. Now, the Scottish Government's very recent update, we understand that the Minister for Victims and Community Safety has continued to chair regular multi-agency roundtables on spiking, most recently just last month, with partners from policing, health victims organisations and prosecution, but also representatives, colleges and universities, community safety and also the nighttime economy sector. And the Government highlights that there is now a consistent national approach designed to ensure that individuals who present to A&E receive clear advice regarding the roles of health professionals and the police when they report incidents of spiking. Additionally, since October, the NHS digital system allows for the recording of those who present to A&E as potential victims of spiking. This aims to improve understanding of the extent to which such incidents also lead to formal police reporting. The Scottish Government highlights that while proposals relevant to spiking are included in the UK Government's Crime and Policing Bill, existing legislation in Scotland already enables the police and prosecutors to tackle perpetrators of this crime effectively. So actually, I think an awful lot of work has taken place in the period since 2023, directly addressing the issues raised by the petitioner. I wonder if colleagues have any suggestions for action. David Russell.
Thank you, Convener. It's to close the petition under Rule 15.7 of Standing Orders on the basis that the Scottish Government has been actively undertaking work to address the issues of the core of the petition, including regular multi-agency engagement and improvements in reporting and data gathering.
Are our colleagues content? We are, thank you. So, progress made. So, actually, quite a successful outcome in relation to the petition, notwithstanding that it's been some time since we were last able to consider it. Petition number 2081 to make chronic kidney disease a key clinical priority, lodged by Professor Jeremy Hughes on behalf of Kidney Research UK and Scotland. And it calls on the Scottish Parliament to do what it says in the petition, to make chronic kidney disease a key clinical priority. And we last considered this on the 7th of May, and we agreed to write to the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Care. In her response, as we then heard from the Minister for Public Health and Women's Health, she reiterated that the Scottish Government does not designate certain conditions as key clinical priorities. The Minister explains that while there is a long-term conditions policy unit, in DG Health. It works on the implementation of specific policies and does not cover all major conditions. A separate unit, the Long-Term Conditions Strategy Unit, is leading on the Scottish Government consultation for the new Long-Term Conditions Framework. And during a Chamber debate in September, the Minister suggested that work in developing the framework was very much in progress, with the governance arrangements due to be finalised. The consultation analysis has also been published. The Minister encouraged the continuing engagement from relevant organisations, highlighting its importance to the way the government would develop the framework in order to improve services for people with long-term conditions, including chronic kidney disease prevention, diagnosis and care. In an additional submission, the petitioner reiterates his concern that there is still no named national clinical lead for chronic kidney disease and no dedicated civil service team member responsible for driving forward improvements. Do members have any comments or suggestions for action? David Torrance.
Thank you, Convener. In light of evidence given to committee, I wonder if the committee would consider closing the petition under Rule 15.7 of Standing Orders on the basis that the Scottish Government has reiterated that it does not designate certain conditions as key clinical priorities, is in the process of developing the long-term conditions framework and has the associated actions plan designed to improve services for people with long-term conditions, including CKD.
Are colleagues content with the recommendation? We are. So we thank again the petitioner for raising the issue, but the Scottish Government position is quite clear. Petition number 2102 to require anyone found guilty of rape or sexual assault to be registered as a sex offender, lodged by Anna Christina Seaver. It calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to abolish the option of an absolute discharge in cases where the accused is found guilty of rape or sexual assault, and to introduce a statutory minimum sentence for these offences, which includes the convicted person being registered as a sex offender. We last considered this petition on the 7th of May, and we then agreed to write to the Scottish Sentencing Council, the Cabinet Secretary for Justice and Home Affairs and the Lord Advocate. The Cabinet Secretary's response notes the sentencing judges will be aware that a consequence of an absolute discharge is that the offender will not be subject to notification requirements, and that this is a factor that they will consider. The submission notes that courts have the option to admonish rather than absolutely discharge, where they consider that no punishment is warranted, but the crime should be recorded and the offender should be made subject to notification requirements. The Secretary also notes that the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service have the power to appeal against an absolute discharge if they consider that it is unduly lenient. The Scottish Sentencing Council's response highlights an instance where the Crown did appeal an absolute discharge. The Scottish Sentencing Council's response highlights the development of sentencing guidelines for the courts on certain sexual offences, including rape and sexual assault. The draft guidelines make no provision for an absolute discharge, as a disposal within the proposed sentencing ranges for either offence. Accordingly, any court which wished to impose one would be taking a decision not to follow a guideline, and in terms of the relevant legislation would require to state its reasons for that decision. The Lord Advocate's response reiterates points made by the Cabinet Secretary and the Scottish Sentencing Council. The submission also sets out details of relevant cases, and I should note that people in the submission, if they were to consider it, may find some of those details distressing. Do members have any comments or suggestions for action? Mr. Russell.
Thank you, Convener. It's to close the petition under Rule 15.7 of Standing Orders on the basis that the Scottish Government does not have any current plans to adjust the powers of the courts to impose absolute discharges in criminal cases. And also, if it is considered that the offence should not be punished, but that the crime should be recorded and the offender should be made subject to notification requirements, courts have the option to admonish rather than absolutely discharge. The draft guidelines on the sentencing of rape, including a minimum custodial sentence of 4 years, and make no provision for absolute discharge as a disposal within the proposed sentencing ranges for rape or sexual assault. This means that the court imposing an absolute discharge would be taking a decision not to follow a guideline and would have to state its reasons for that decision. The Crown can appeal sentences of absolute discharge if it is considered to be potentially unduly lenient.
Thank you, Mr. Russell. A reflection on the various responses that we received in respect of this petition. Are colleagues content with the recommendation as put to the committee? Agreed. We are. Thank you very much. Petition number 2145 to bring in the compulsory microchipping for cats in Scotland. This has been lodged by Gillian Brown, and it calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to make it compulsory for cats and kittens to be microchipped. And we'll ask to consider this on the 21st of May, and we agree to write to the Scottish Government. The Scottish Government response to the committee states that whilst it recognised the level of feeling associated with the subject, there are no plans at this time to introduce legislation to make the microchipping and registration of cats compulsory in Scotland. The Scottish Government does note that it is considering the recommendations made from the Scottish Animal Welfare Commission in their report concerning the responsible ownership and care of cats. Do members have any comments or suggestions for action? Mr. Golden.
Thank you, Convener. I think in terms of mandate microchipping, it needs to be a wider holistic approach. It's not just about initially microchipping a cat. It is about ensuring that details are kept up to date and indeed that there's a single database in which vets or other individuals can check, which we currently do not have. Therefore, given that the Scottish Government is considering recommendations, as the EU convener highlighted, I would hope that these are dealt with in the round, and ultimately, therefore, I believe the committee should close the petition under Rule 15.7 of the Standing Orders.
Thank you, Mr. Golden. And of course, in a more rounded way, it might be that if we accept that recommendation, a fresh petition could come in the next Parliament which addresses those broader concerns that both the Government and you have identified. Are we content to close the petition on the basis of the recommendation made to us by Mr. Golden? We are. Thank you. That brings us to the last of our continuing petitions this morning, which is petition number 2147, to create more women-only homeless accommodation that protects and meets the specific needs of women. This has been lodged by the Laura Jones on behalf of the Scottish Tenants Organisation. It calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to reform homeless services in Scotland and to ensure services protect women from sexual assault and exploitation by increasing funding and supporting the creation of more women-only homeless accommodation. We last considered this on the 7th of May, and we agreed to write to the Scottish Government. The Scottish Government explains that it's delivering an Equally Safe Fund supports a signposting service for appropriate women-only services, as well as advocacy to Women's Aid and other organisations tackling domestic abuse. This includes providing advice and support to prevent women from becoming homeless in the first place. The response also indicates that the 2025-26 budget provides local government with a real terms funding increase of 5.5%. The government reiterates its position to allow local authorities to manage their own budgets and allocate funds based on local needs and priorities, including on women-only homelessness services. Additionally, the government states that it targeted 80% of its capital funding for voids and acquisitions over 24-25 and 25-26 to areas with the most sustained temporary accommodation pressures. The aim of this is to increase the supply of social and affordable homes through acquisitions and, if appropriate, to bring long-term empty social homes back into use. The government's view is that this policy should reduce long periods in temporary accommodation, especially for families with children. Do colleagues have any suggestions for action? Mr. Torrance?
Thank you, Convener. I wonder if the committee would consider closing the petition under Rule 15.7 of the Standing Orders on the basis that the Scottish Government has stated that its increased funding to local authorities, including 2025-26, and that is the responsibility of individual local authorities to allocate financial resources on the basis of local needs and priorities, including for women-only homeless services, and that the Scottish Government has provided some targeted funding to areas with sustained pressure in order to reduce long periods in temporary accommodation.
Thank you, Mr. Torrance. Are colleagues content with that action? we are. We move to agenda item 3, which is a consideration of new petitions. I've always, through this session, before we consider new petitions, said to those who might be following our proceedings that before we consider a petition, we ask the Scottish Parliament's independent research body, SPICE, to do some detailed work advising us on the issues underpinning the petition, and also we seek a preliminary view from the Scottish Government. However, as I said at the start of today's meeting, I'm afraid we are now considering petitions, the very last of the new petitions tabled to us, with very little time left in this session, if any, to do justice to any of these petitions. We have barely a handful of meetings left, and it may well be that the interests of the petitions will be best served by being freshly tabled to the new Parliament after May. I'm going to upset the order because I recognise that Mr Mountain, who joined us for an earlier petition, is still with us, so I will move to the one in which I know he has an interest first, in order to allow him to pursue the very many busy aspects of his day yet ahead, and to acknowledge, of course, that he won't be with us in the next session to advocate on behalf of the issues raised in the petition. So this is his moment so to do. And the first petition is 2186, to review the personal foot care guidance to ensure equity to access foot care services in rural and remote areas in Scotland. It's lodged by Maria Aitken on behalf of the Caithness Health Action Team, from whom we heard on an earlier petition we considered this morning. The petition calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to review the personal foot care guidance to ensure equity of access to toenail cutting services in rural and remote areas of Scotland. It says that everyone should have access to healthcare, including foot care services, no matter where they live, and that to deny people access leaves them vulnerable to infection, less mobile, and more at risk of falling, particularly elderly people, who I know this is very often overlooked and underappreciated. It suggests that personal foot care guidance fails to consider mitigations to ensure equity of access to toenail cutting services. The Scottish Government makes clear in its response that it has no intention of reviewing the guidance, which was refreshed in March. Within its submission, the Scottish Government highlights relevant legislation and a host of national policy frameworks and strategies it considers underpin the current guidance, and notes that it is for individual health boards to take decisions on service delivery tailored to local populations' needs and priorities. Edward Mountain, would you like to say a few words in relation to the petition?
Thank you, Convener. Can I start off just by paying tribute to Caithness Health Action Team for all the work that they do, and particularly Maria Aitken. She has been a petitioner of this Parliament over the entire period of this session. Now, this petition actually came about as a result of the removal of services in Caithness, meaning that if anyone wanted treatment for their foot care, they would have to travel down to Regmore, much of which is beyond their capabilities. I fully understand the pressures, Convener, that this committee is under. I am working hard with the local health board to try and get this service reinstated. And on that basis, I doubt we will get much more from this petition or much further action on this petition before the end of this session. So reluctantly, I would probably agree that it's appropriate for the Petitions Committee to close this petition, but on the understanding that the Caithness Health Action Team bring this back to the new Parliament if they find that the Health Board are not prepared to look after the many people who need help, mainly because they're diabetic and can't do this themselves, and the risks involved of doing it themselves. And so I guess, reluctantly, Convener, I fall on my sword, as this is my last meeting, to say that I'm happy for you to close the petition.
Well, it's very generous of you to anticipate our actions, Mr Mountain. Can I therefore propose two actions? One, that we do close the petition under Rule 15.7 of Standing Orders on the basis that the Scottish Government does not intend to review the guidance as it was refreshed in March 25. It is underpinned by a wide range of national policy frameworks that promote equitable access to personal care, including foot care, and notes that decisions about service delivery are made at a local level by individual NHS boards. But in closing the petition and noting that point, that we write to the relevant health board, expressing the concern that the committee has heard about the distances now required for people who in Caithness who now have to travel to Regmore for this service, which is beyond the capability of many involved, and saying that The committee, while it was unable to do more in this session of Parliament, anticipate that the petition might re-emerge and that it would therefore be helpful if NHS Highlands and Islands considered these matters in advance of an anticipation of that fact.
That would be great.
Are colleagues content with us to proceed on that basis? We are. There we go. That brings us to the next of our new petitions, which is petition number 2174 to stop council tax debt collection, launched by Marianne Duncan. The petition calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to abolish enforcement of council tax debts. The Scottish Government's response to the petition states that councils have powers to write off arrears where appropriate, and that this is a decision for councils to take locally. The Scottish Government is aware of concerns around the use of enforcement measures and, through ongoing engagement with COSLA, continue to encourage local authorities to adopt proportionate and empathetic approaches, particularly where individuals are experiencing hardship. Well, I would have thought where individuals are experiencing hardship, but in other circumstances, I would hope they would pursue the debt, frankly. By way of funding, the Scottish Government provided an extra £2.2 million in funding for a citizens' advice project that supports people with council tax debt. The submission also notes that the Government is aware of concerns regarding local authority practices in issuing final demand notices, and that it is working with COSLA to promote consistency and best practice in debt recovery procedures. The Scottish Government states that it is open to considering related issues, including the prescription period for council tax debt, and is committed to consulting on this matter in due course, should it be in a position to do so. The petitioner has provided a written submission which notes that the cost of living crisis has left many people choosing between food or fuel before paying council tax, and the petitioner, well, I don't suppose it notes it, it asserts it. The petitioner believes that harsh enforcement regime of debt collection can take much needed money away from people through wage arrestment, bank arrestment or benefit reductions. She claims this force is forcing people into a perpetual cycle of debt and poverty. The submission states that a lack of impartial scrutiny and monitoring of the administration of council tax leads to inconsistencies, inequalities, undetected errors, abuse of authority, abuse of process, fraud and a lack of accountability. Do members have any comments or suggestions for actions? Mr Torrance?
Thank you, Convener. In light of evidence before us, I wonder if the committee would consider closing the petition under Rule 15.7 of Standing Orders on the basis that the Scottish Government is currently undertaking work with COSLA and the Institute of Fiscal Studies and will inform potential council tax reform proposals in the next parliamentary session. In doing so, can we highlight to the petitioner that a consultation is open till the 30th of January, and if it doesn't, the consultation results, that she can submit a new petition in the current session.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. There is a consultation. We'd very much encourage the petitioner to participate in that, but were that to fall short of the expectations of the petitioner, then a fresh petition could be submitted in the next session. Are we content to implement? We are. Strengthen veto powers when assessing business improvement district proposals is the subject of petition number 2179, lodged by Gavin Templeton, and it is the first of two bid-related petitions we'll consider today, and it calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to require local authorities to veto proposals for business improvement districts, commonly known as bids, if the levy due to be paid by businesses is not proportional with the rateable value of properties, and to introduce a duty on Scottish ministers to take such levy proportionally into account in any decisions regarding bid proposals. Now, a business improvement district is a formal partnership of businesses and other organisations which works together to improve a defined area, often a town centre or a shopping area within a city. The Spice briefing explains that a proposal for a bid has to set out the levy to be paid by individual businesses before a vote takes place to establish the bid formally. All businesses located in the area are balloted, and a majority of businesses, by both number and rateable value, are required to vote in favour of a bid before it can progress. A local authority can veto a bid under certain circumstances, including if it considers that the levy will lead to a significantly disproportional financial burden being imposed on any person or business entitled to vote in the ballot. The petitioner asks that the ability for local authorities to veto a bid proposal should become a requirement in the above circumstances. In additional submissions, both the petitioner and the campaign group Unfair Name Air express a number of concerns supported by examples regarding the impact of existing legislation on small businesses and the lack of a mechanism for local authorities to assess bid proposals fairly and consistently. Our SPICE researchers asked Scotland's Towns Partnership whether any local authority had ever vetoed a bid proposal, and the response was that the STP was not aware of any such instance. The Scottish Government submission reiterates that existing legislation enables veto powers for local authorities, but it does not address the petition ask for this power to be made a requirement. And the Government states that there are no plans to review or amend existing bid legislation during this parliamentary term, given the potential cost and resource implications that such work would involve. The Scottish Government does not see a benefit to introducing a duty of Scottish ministers to take levy proportionality into account in decisions regarding bid proposals. The Government's view is that the management and governance of a bid are matters for the bid itself. It also states that local authorities have better knowledge and intelligence of the local context, and that involving Scottish ministers would add a further level of bureaucracy and contemplation. That point inevitably being true, are there any comments or suggestions for action? Mr. Golden.
Thank you, Convener. I think that the committee should close the petition under Rule 15.7 of the Standing Orders on the basis that current bid legislation contains a dual key mechanism to help protect against large firms forcing through a bid proposal against the wishes of small firms, or vice versa. The Scottish Government's position is that the regulatory role in relation to bids should be for local authorities and not Scottish ministers. The Scottish Government has no plans to review or amend existing bid legislation during this parliamentary term due to cost, resource and time constraints.
Well, that latter point being the operational one. However, that's in the course of this parliamentary term. So this does seem to me to be a petition that might have the opportunity to gain further traction in the next parliamentary term, because I can see that there would be a route forward to exploring this issue in more depth at that time. Mr. Torrance?
Can I just say I agree with you, Convener. I think if a petitioner was to resubmit in the next parliamentary time, it would give the committee time to look at it in front of it and take evidence in front of it.
Because I can see where we could pursue this were time available to us, but we're not going to get a response in the time left to us in this Parliament from the various authorities to whom we would have to write. So there does seem to be merit in this petition, and I say that as someone who's come up against these bid proposals, and I think the proportionality issue is actually quite an important one, which has been expressed to me as well. So with some regret, I think we close the petition at this stage, but very much recommend to the petitioner that this would be a petition very well worth resubmitting at the start of the new parliamentary term for the new committee to perhaps explore in more detail. And I know that might be a bit frustrating to the petitioner, who I think might be with us, but it is, with only 3 meetings left, inevitably the case we're just not going to make any progress on the aims that have been identified. But I think the the objectives identified are certainly worth exploring. And I would unfortunately, I'm not able to take comment from the floor, but I would very much hope that that would be the case. Yeah, sorry? Yeah. So that, I think, is why this would be something that I would very much encourage the petitioner to submit. I think I'm overhearing that it might be that there are metrics missing. So reluctantly we close this, but with that recommendation that this would be one I would have standing on the stocks to resubmit to the new committee in the Parliament that meets after May, in the hope that we can take the issue forward more at that time. So with some regret. Petition number 2184 is the second of the bid petitions this morning, which is to provide bid levy relief to charities and non-profit organisations. It's been lodged by Tommy Reid. It calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to amend the relevant legislation so that charities and non-profits that qualify for mandatory or discretionary rates relief under Section 42A of the Local Government Financial Provisions, etc. Scotland Act 62 are also exempt from paying the bid levy or receive equivalent relief. Conduct a survey of businesses affected by bids in order to assess the impact of the levy more widely, particularly in small businesses and third sector organisations, to implement any further legislative changes that may arise from such a review. According to the Spice briefing, it is possible for a charity to be required to pay a bid levy, even if it is in receipt of 100% relief from the local authority in respect of business rates payments. However, as shown in the Scottish Government response, current legislation does allow bid proposals to include a levy exemption or relief for certain organisations, and this can apply to charities and non-profit organisations if the individual bid chooses to set this out in the proposal and if the proposal is approved in the follow-up ballot. As we've seen during consideration of the previous position, the Scottish Government indicates that it has no plans to review or amend existing bid legislation before the end of this parliamentary term. But regarding the second ask of the petition, the Government considers that it is both practical and achievable. It suggests that the annual bid survey undertaken by Scotland's Improvement Districts, SIDs, could incorporate questions regarding the impact of bids, including the bid levy, on businesses including charities and non-profit organisations. It does seem to me that, again, we're looking at two petitions that we've not received I can't recall us receiving representations in this area of policy during the whole of this Parliament, and it does seem to me that there's some work that really could be done exploring some of these issues. But I wonder, Mr Torrance, if you would regrettably make a similar proposal. But again, I think there are issues here Parliament should explore.
I wonder if the committee consider closing the petition under Rule 15.7 of Standard Orders on the basis that the bid proposals can already include exemptions and reliefs for charities and non-profitable organisations. The Scottish Government believes that the mandating exemptions by law would create additional layers of bureaucracy and complications. The Scottish Government believes that a second ask of the petition is practical and achievable, and it suggests it could be incorporated by Scotland's Improvement Districts in their annual bid survey. In closing the petition, Convener, I wonder if the committee could write to Scotland's Improvement Districts, encourage them to consider implementing the second ask of a petition as part of their annual survey, as suggested by the Scottish Government.
And I think in doing that, we write to the petitioner saying we are minded to accept that the issues being raised in relation to bids are something Parliament might like to take an interest in, but that it would be for the next Parliament. So again, I think it would be useful to have that petition standing ready to be resubmitted for the new committee when it meets in May to consider. That brings us, I think, to the final two of our new petitions. Petition number 2189 to remove legal protected status for gulls to help reduce their numbers in residential areas. Subject of a recent debate in Parliament, lodged by Ian Boyles, calling on the Scottish Government to urge the Scottish Government to no longer grant protected status to gulls in order to facilitate the reduction of seagull numbers in populated areas and ensure the safety of residents from attacks. The Spice briefing shows that the common gull, great black-backed gull and herring gull are now all red-listed species of conservation concern in the UK, while lesser black-backed gull and black-headed gull are amber-listed. Certain species now appear to have a higher proportion of their UK breeding population nesting in urban and inland nest sites rather than on coastal sites. And those of us who live in urban sites are very aware of it because gulls have become the subject of quite a few representations, certainly to me as a constituency member. Gulls are protected by the Wildlife and Countryside Act 1981 as amended by the Nature Conservation Scotland Act of 2004. It's illegal to intentionally or recklessly kill, injure or take any gull, and an offence to take, damage or destroy an active nest or its contents. In Scotland, it is also illegal to also obstruct or prevent gulls from using their nest. Nature Scot has powers under the Act to licence activities for defined legal purposes that may otherwise be an offence. Those purposes include, for example, preserving public health or public or air safety. So hopefully our friends in Nature Scott might actually do something in that regard. The Scottish Government's position is that legal protection status for gulls should not be removed, as it does not consider this to be the solution to help reduce their numbers in residential areas. We should send them a little letter asking them to fly elsewhere. In its submission, the Government highlights that the maximum level of licensed control authorised between 2020 and 2023 could have led to gull population declines, according to research carried out by the British Trust for Ornithology. In September, the Minister for Agriculture and Connectivity chaired a gull summit in Inverness, subject of some controversy. As a result of the summit, the focus over the coming months will be on 5 key areas in relation to gull management. These actions include the joint development and delivery of a gull management pilot for the city of Inverness by Nature Scott and the Highland Council, which will inform the development of national best practice. Additionally, the Government makes it clear that Nature Scott will work to support licence applications earlier in the year, and that its focus will be on licensing in areas where health and safety needs are highest. Do members have any comments or suggestions for actions? Mr. Torrance, you're supplanting Mr. Golden's prevailing interest in the wildlife, are you?
I am.
Right. Mr. Torrance.
Kabir, I wonder if the committee would consider closing the position under Rule 15.7 of Standing Orders on the basis that the Scottish Government does not support the removal of legal protected status for gulls on the basis of declining gull populations. The Scottish Government has indicated that Nature Scott work to support licensed applications for gull control will focus on areas where health and safety needs are highest, and the projects such as the gull management pilot led by Highland Council and Nature Scott will inform future national best practices in the area.
I thank Mr. Torrance for that proposal. I do wonder how Nature Scott defines the areas where health and safety needs are highest, frankly. I mean, I'd be most interested to know. Mr. Golden?
And I agree with Mr. Torrance, but I mean, I think it's worth putting on the record that, firstly, the petition is aiming to reduce gull numbers in residential areas, and to conflate that with a wider piece around declining gull populations would perhaps be wrong. And really, for people out there, they see what many of us see, which is a massive increase in gull populations, aggressive gull populations, particularly over the summer when you might be dining outside, and you know they're set up to attack. And I think that I'm astonished that a pilot's required to assist with this, but nonetheless I would encourage the petitioner with a specific focus to reintroduce, if they're so minded, in the new session, because I certainly feel that the response from the Scottish Government is utterly inadequate in this area.
Yes, I think we've got no option but to close the petition given the Scottish Government response. I would hope that this could be resubmitted. It did seem to attract some ridicule when it was raised in the Chamber, but I think from those who are obviously not representing urban populations, particularly in residential areas, as you say, where there's outside dining, where, you know, I have evidence in my own constituency of young children being attacked by the urban gull population, and there being absolutely no remedy open to the Council as matters stand, given the protected status, to do anything about it. And that's why I wonder what areas where health and safety focus needs are highest actually means to our friends at Nature Scott. Given that I've not been all that friendly to them. Are we minded to close the petition? But I think, again, this is a subject matter which I suppose this committee is designed to actually consider. It's absolutely a matter that I think no party is going to pursue in a public manifesto, but which is of an actual concern to living communities. And I very much would encourage the petitioner to resubmit this petition in the new session, because I think it is something that could be pursued more actively. And I would very much welcome watching, if I'm not in a position to question myself, Nature Scott on being tackled on this matter. Have we agreed, therefore, to... Petition number 2195 to establish a kindergarten stage in Scottish education, the last of our petitions, lodged by Willie French and Tam Bailey on behalf of Upstart Scotland, and the petition call on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to establish a relationship-centred play-based kindergarten stage for children aged between the ages of 3 and 7. The Scottish Government's response to the petition states that the early level of the Curriculum for Excellence is designed to support the implementation of a responsive continuous play-based curriculum for children aged 3 until the end of P1 for the majority of children. The submission goes on to state that raising the school age, starting age and introducing a kindergarten stage would represent a fundamental change in the scope of education in Scotland and a significant structural change to the provision of education. The response states that there would be a number of significant delivery implications for raising the school's starting age. The petitioner's submission notes that children in Scotland start formal schooling at an earlier age than most of their international peers. The petitioners recognise the value of the Scottish Government's realising the ambition guidance on this issue, but point to a lack of published evidence regarding the extent to which it's been implemented. The submission highlights that evidence from their group Upstart suggests that the adoption of realising the ambition, that's the name of the programme, is inconsistent and that other policy drivers may hinder its implementation. The petitioners believe that establishing a kindergarten stage would align better with the priority of reducing the poverty-related attainment gap and would meet the developmental needs of children more effectively than current arrangements. Do members have any comments or suggestions for action? Mr. Russell.
Thank you, Convener. Wonder if the committee would consider to close the petition under Rule 15.7 of Standing Orders on the basis that the Scottish Government has not indicated that it will take forward the aims of the petition and has stated that raising the school starting age and introducing a kindergarten stage would represent a fundamental change in the scope of education in Scotland and a significant structural change in the provision of education. There would be a number of significant delivery implications for raising the school starting age, including the ELC and school workforce infrastructure, legislation and the curriculum framework that would need to be fully analysed and costed. It would therefore be unlikely that the petition's ask could be achieved at this point in the parliamentary session, and the committee is limited in the actions it can take to progress the petition in the time remaining in this session.
Thank you. I mean, it is an interesting concept, but I think it would be one that, again, would need far more time. And actually, I suspect even then would probably be a petition that would be referred on to the Education Committee in due course. But nonetheless, I think it could be the subject of some preliminary work by a subsequent committee of this Parliament in the next session. So again, I think worth advocating that it be a petition that might be resubmitted when Parliament resumes. And that brings us to the end of the public part of our meeting, and our next meeting is scheduled to take place on Wednesday the 14th of January 2026. We now move into private session.